Loves here, and today we are going to be taking a look at Roman numerals. They are numerals that roam around. We've been using these Roman numerals, and we use them all the time in music. We use them because, of course, they're really great for analyzing things. Let me adjust my angle here. We like how they allow us additional insight into what a chord is doing. So we have figure bass, a great way of looking at inversions, and we have Roman numerals, a great way of looking at how a chord fits into a key. It just makes us more aware of what's happening. There is actually an inversion system that is associated with Roman numerals. However, we typically use figure bass, but you may wind up with an instructor or have one that really prefers the Roman numeral method. Roman numeral method's really great in that it's a little more generalized. It's not as specific with intervals and such. And so figure bass is a little more exact, and therefore we usually use that because we say a lot more when we speak in figure bass. But this can be really great too. So let's go ahead, or bass position, whatever you want to call it. So, okay, let's start off. I'm going to be filling in some gaps I've sort of left hanging around Roman numerals that we really should fill up if we're going to start using this system more formally. So we have Roman numerals, and so now Roman numerals are relative to a key, right? So if we have the key of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, we are going to have the one of a Roman numeral. There are 7 notes, and then it repeats, right? It's called the heptatonic scale. And with these 7 notes, we give each note a number, 1, 2. So C, because it's the first note of the scale, would be 1. And the D, since it's the second note of the scale, would be 2. And so Roman numerals are done in a key. So here we have a C major chord, and I'm saying here we are in the key of C, and it would be 1. But if this was a D minor chord, it would be a 2. And then maybe it was the E, so it would be 3, so on and so forth, up to 7, and then we go back to 1. We never get to 8 because 8 would be just considered a 1. And then you start looking at chord qualities because I can already hear questions about what about add chords and stuff like that. So let's go ahead. Let's look at, we're going to be looking at the very basics real quick. So a capital Roman numeral is associated with major chords and augmented chords. So if we have a C major chord, it's going to be a capital 1. If we have a C minor chord, like we do right here, this would be a lowercase 1. And it's a 1 because it's a C chord. It's a chord built around C. So it's a 1. And now if we were to exclude any other information and just use the numbers, we would not be able to tell inversions from this. Now there's a system, but typically we will apply that with figure bass or bass position. So if maybe this chord right here, this C, E, G, C, E flat G, if the C was up on top and this was a first inversion triad, it would still be just a 1 chord. We would still just write a lowercase 1. So major and augmented chords are associated with uppercase Roman numerals, while diminished and minor chords are associated with lowercase Roman numerals. So here we have a lowercase 1, and over here we have an uppercase 1. Again, here's a diminished chord and an augmented chord, and we have a lowercase 1 and an uppercase 1 for their respective chord parts. So these are all 1 chords, but they're a little bit different. Now, major chords don't need the word major or anything next to them. And this we're talking about 7th chords, which we'll talk about in a little bit because they all sort of have a couple of things we need to talk about when we get to 7th chords. But here we assume major if nothing is really notated. But if we are let's say it's a major, but it's an augmented chord. So it's not major, it's augmented. Well, it's an uppercase Roman numeral, and we have a plus sign to show that this is an augmented chord. So we will have a plus sign. We will have a diminished. For diminished chords, we will have the word dim, or we will have a little circle. We've seen the circles in previous videos. So I'll have a little circle, and that will be representative of diminished. Okay, so Roman numerals are used relative to the key. So, okay, yeah. So we've already talked about all that stuff. And then here I am saying, look at this. Here's a D major chord, and it's a 2 chord since we're working in C. And we actually have, and we know it's a major chord because it's uppercase. So we know we need an F sharp and an A. And it's just letting us look at what are we could, using this notation, we could say, what are the properties of a major 2 chord functioning inside a major key. Like, what can we do with this? How can we make it useful? So that's Roman numerals, in action. But I'm just showing you here, this does not specify the bass position. These are all D major chords, but they have, first inversion, second inversion. So there is a system. So if you look down here, I give a little spiel on it. In order to notate the different systems, we use the letters A, B, and C to represent root position, first inversion, second inversion, and so on and so forth. And so if we had here's like a good example. So let's say right here, what letter would go right here? So this is in second inversion. And so we would use the letter C because A would be root, B would be first inversion, and C would be second inversion. And so we would put a 2C to indicate a 2 and second inversion. And now it's pretty useful because it's useful just because, that's a really general way. Figure bass position, pretty much the same thing sort of, except for there's this extra layer that goes along with it. And so some professors prefer this because realistically bass position doesn't tell you really anything more than because if you consider it, we always treat it like that just tells you what the lowest note is. So I don't know. Some professors therefore like this one more. Personally, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, you learn them both. They're both commonly used. Okay, so, and then I say down here, we generally don't use this system. And it's because there is an extra little layer of detail that goes along with bass position with the plus and minuses and all the stuff that happens with it. That doesn't exist in this form. But it's a nice general form, easy way. It's like, you could call it sort of the rounding of music. You round to make math equations easier. This is sort of like rounding. And so we say, if a note is required outside of the key you're in, so let's say we're in C major and we need some other note, like we want to make a C sharp major chord for whatever reason, we can simply add an accidental in front of the note. So here I'm like, oh, I am in C major, but I need a B flat. I'm going to make a B flat. What is this? B flat major chord. So I need to put a B flat in front to indicate that while I'm playing, or I'm not treating this like, this should be a capital 7. Okay. So here is a capital 7 and our B flat has been, back it up. Okay. So here we have a B flat chord. It's the 7 and we put a flat to indicate that we're using a B flat. I just caught a typo. My bad. Okay. So over here we have another B flat chord, but now it is diminished and therefore we write diminished and we include the flat sign to show that. And here we have a 4 because the F is the 4, but we've risen it has to have it sharp. So we include a sharp to indicate that it is a 4. And since it's a major chord, we have a major, it is capitalized. And so you just include accidentals to include that. Pretty straightforward stuff. So coming down here to the 7ths, by the way, there is no second page. If you're wondering what's over here, it's just a bunch of rests. I should probably save what I just did too. So for 7th chords, let's talk about 7ths. Now, most of the 7ths follow the rules on what we have previously discussed, right? But there are a couple exceptions to this. So here I have 4 of the 7th chords. And so for this, I have for example, we know that the dominant 7 would be a major chord with just a 7 after it, right? But what about a minor 7? So we actually don't write minor 7. Minor is indicated by the lowercase or uppercase Roman numerals. And so lowercase Roman numerals tell us this is a minor 7 chord. So this is an E minor 7 chord. Okay, cool. So that's the E minor 7. If we come over here, we've got another 3 chord and it's half diminished. And we indicate that by, either writing half dim or half diminished, or you can put a little circle with a slash through it and that will indicate half diminished as well. Because you can't make a half diminished chord without a 7th, you can drop the 7 and just put the little symbol. It is there. It has to be there. So that's that. This particular font I'm using doesn't support that. So I just write it all out just to be as clear as possible. And then over here we have the 3. Now for this one, we have to include the 7, right? Because there's diminished triads. And so if we just put diminished, we assume a triad. So we need to add the 7 to say, hey, there's a 7th here. And lowercase because we're dealing with the diminished chord and we get the 7. The big one I wanted to point out was sort of this one, the minor 7. And then over here, we have a dominant 7, right? And then this is the one exception. I don't believe I actually put down an example for this, but you would actually write maj, or you just write maj or a capital M for a major chord. Let's build one real quick. So let's say that I'm going to add one over here. So this would be a dominant 7th because it's a major chord with a 7th, with a lowered 7th, so the minor 7th. But let's go ahead and build a major 7 because I did not include that for some reason. Let me put my cursor over here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put down C, E, G, and then the major 7 will be B. That's a really easy chord to build. So we're going to hit Control L, and we're going to ask ourselves, what kind of chord is this? Well, it's a major chord. It's a 1. And it's a 7, but if we just put 1 7, that's that's the same as saying a dominant 7. We don't want a dominant 7. We want a major 7. So we include M7. And the reason why we specify major, like why you would think major would be the default, right? But it's not, because dominant 7s are used way more. They're by far more common than major 7 chords. These are all common chords, but because of the role that we will begin to see, and will be very clear to you as we write Roman numerals and use this analysis system in combination with bass position, that the dominant 7 chord is actually called the dominant 7 chord because it's on the dominant of the key usually, when it's actually comes from harmonic analysis. That's how it's got its name. It's the 5th, the chord that's usually built on the 5, even though its technical name is the major minor 7, which if you look at it from a chord building perspective, we're building a major triad with a minor 7. So we call it the major minor 7. But the name dominant 7 is used far more often because that chord is just used like that. It's one of the most used 7th chords in tonal music. And so that's why this one gets to be the default as the 7. And so that's what I was sort of mentioning before when we were talking up here. But anyways, that is the 7th. That is Roman numerals. And they are very, very useful for analyzing, like some chords are even named after the fact that the position they play in a key, and Roman numerals help us identify that. They do have an inversion system. However, we prefer bass position most of the time, but you'll more than likely use the Roman numeral system at some point in time. I've used it. It's whatever. It just depends on what you're talking about, how important it is to specify some of these things. But anyways, hopefully this was useful to you. This is going to be very useful to you as you get into figure bass and learn how to identify things. I wanted to cover this to avoid any potholes in our understanding. And we didn't really talk about the 7th chords quite yet. So there's that. I did this kind of quick, so if there's like a mistake somewhere, feel free to point it out in the comments. I want this information to be as correct as possible to help people get on their path with learning music. If you found this useful, feel free to share it. Tell your friends if they're taking a music class, because I'm largely creating this for my friends who are currently taking music classes and are looking for supplemental resources. If you have any questions, let me know and subscribe. And have a blessed day.